have 1 day to leave this house," my daughter said. My grandson added, "You're not even my real grandma." I smiled, pulled out a document and replied, "Actually, you have 24 hours to find a new place to live. Stay with me until the end, and tell me in the comments which city you're watching from. I want to see how far my story travels." Her words hit me like a physical blow. I stood frozen in the kitchen doorway, still holding the dish towel I'd been using to dry the breakfast plates. Oakley's face was tight with anger, something that had been brewing for months, but hearing it aimed at me with such bitterness made my chest tighten. "Please, Oakley," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "This is my home too." She laughed, a sharp, cold sound that made me flinch. "Your home? Mom, you've been living here rent-free for 3 years. I've been the one feeding you, supporting you, keeping a roof over your head. And what do I get in return? Complaints and criticism." I wanted to tell her that wasn't true, that I'd spent countless nights sitting by Kent's bedside when he was sick, that I'd cooked meals, folded laundry, and cleaned the house without being asked, but the words stuck in my throat, like always. Kent appeared in the doorway behind his mother. At 15, he was already taller than me, the boy I'd helped raise, the child I'd sung to sleep, told stories to, and loved with every piece of my heart. Now, he looked at me with the same coldness his mother carried. "Maybe now I can have friends over without being embarrassed," he said, rolling his eyes. The casual cruelty in his voice made my knees weak. I reached out to steady myself against the counter, and even that small gesture seemed to irritate him. "God, you're so dramatic," he continued, glancing at his mom for approval. "It's not like you're even my real grandmother. Real grandmas don't live off their families." The word "live off" echoed in my mind like a marble rolling in an empty jar. I felt something inside me crack, not just my heart, but something deeper, my sense of belonging, my belief that love could endure anything. Oakley stepped closer, her eyes shining with a cold satisfaction. "You heard him, Mom. Even Kent sees it. You're not contributing anything here. You're just existing." I looked around the kitchen I'd organized, the living room where I'd spent countless evenings helping Kent with homework, the photos on the refrigerator from better days. When had I become invisible in my own life? "I raised you," I said quietly, the words tasting strange on my tongue. I'd stopped defending myself long ago. It was easier to just take the blame and move on. "Barely," Oakley shot back. "You were always working, always tired, always making me feel guilty for wanting what other kids had. And now you expect me to take care of you because you didn't plan for your future?" The unfairness of it took my breath away. Every double shift I'd worked was for her. Every sacrifice, every missed holiday, every overtime hour, all for her. But explaining that now would only make me sound pitiful. Kent crossed his arms, mirroring his mother's stance. "My friends think it's weird that you live here," he said. "Jason's grandma has her own place and takes him on trips. You just make the house smell like old furniture." Each word landed like a small knife, deliberate, cutting deep. I wondered when he'd learned to be so cruel, or if I'd simply refused to see it until now. "Where am I supposed to go?" I asked softly. Oakley shrugged. "That's not my problem anymore. Maybe one of those senior living places. They have programs for people who can't afford it." The thought made my stomach twist. I'd been to those places when searching for options for my own mother. The sterile halls, the tired faces, the way the staff spoke to residents like children. "I need more time," I said, my voice trembling. "A day isn't enough." "You've had 3 years," Oakley replied coldly. "I'm done supporting your dependents. It's not healthy for any of us." Then she turned to Kent, her tone suddenly soft and warm. "Go start your homework, sweetheart. Grandma and I need to finish talking." Kent grinned, clearly pleased with himself. As he left, I heard him mutter, "Finally, some peace and quiet." When the door closed, Oakley's expression changed, not to kindness but to something colder. Oakley's expression had changed. It was the look of someone preparing to deliver a final blow. "Mom," she said, her voice calm but cutting, "I know this sounds harsh, but it's for your own good. You need to learn to stand on your own again. You've gotten too used to depending on others." The irony wasn't lost on me. This coming from the same woman who used to call me at midnight in tears when Kent was a baby and she couldn't handle it alone. From the same daughter who'd begged me to move in when her ex stopped paying child support. From the same child I'd sacrificed everything for. But I didn't say any of that. Instead, I nodded slowly, feeling something shift inside me. Not broken this time, hardened, like steel being forged in fire. "I understand," I said quietly. Oakley blinked, clearly surprised by my calm. Maybe she'd expected tears, pleading, even threats to call other family members, but I simply stood there, looking at her with new eyes. "Good," she said finally, though her tone wavered just a little. "It's really for the best. You'll see." I walked to my room, feeling both their eyes follow me. Behind me, I could already hear Oakley on the phone, probably telling her sister how difficult I'd become. That familiar sting of being discussed like an object instead of a person washed over me again. I sat down on the bed I'd bought myself and looked around at my few possessions: framed photos of Oakley and Kent, shelves of old books, the jewelry box my mother had given me decades ago. To them, it probably looked like a small, faded life. But to me, it was everything I had built. And then something unexpected happened. Instead of despair, a strange calm settled over me, sharp, steady, and clear. They wanted me gone? Fine. They thought I was powerless? Let's see about that. I reached into my nightstand drawer and pulled out a manila folder I'd hoped I'd never need. Inside were documents that would change everything, proof that the power in this house wasn't where they thought it was. Tomorrow, when I was supposed to be packing my things in shame, they'd finally learn who Peta Morrison really was. That night, I didn't sleep. How could I? Every time I closed my eyes, I heard Kent's voice calling me a burden, saw Oakley's satisfied smirk as she handed down her ultimatum. But as the hours passed, other memories began to surface, ones I'd buried for years just to keep the peace. I remembered the phone call that started it all 3 years ago. Oakley's voice had been shaking, desperate in a way I hadn't heard since she was a little girl afraid of thunderstorms. "Mom, I don't know what to do," she'd cried. "David stopped sending child support. The bank's threatening foreclosure. I might lose the house." Those weren't manipulative tears. They were real. And, like always, my heart had moved faster than my reason. "How much do you need?" I'd asked, already calculating how much I could take from my retirement savings. "I don't know." "Maybe you could come stay with us for a while," she'd said through sobs. "Help with Kent, with the house payments, just until I get back on my feet." Just until. Those 2 words had marked the beginning of the end of my independence. I'd sold my small but cozy apartment, the one I'd worked 30 years to pay off. I'd cashed in my savings, my bonds, even sold my mother's engagement ring, all of it, to help Oakley keep this house, the same house she now claimed was hers alone. At first, things were okay. Oakley had been grateful, the daughter I remembered from better times. She'd included me in decisions, thanked me, told me how she couldn't have done it without me. But gratitude fades quickly. By 6 months, it had turned into expectation. By a year, I had become invisible. The woman who'd saved their home had somehow become an unwelcome guest. And the little humiliations? They piled up. When she introduced me to her friends, she'd always say, "This is my mother. She's staying with us for a while." Never. "This is my mother who helped me keep our home." Then came the rules. Don't use the good towels. Don't touch the expensive food. Keep the TV volume down. Don't invite anyone over. Don't rearrange anything. Each don't chipped away at me until I learned to take up less and less space, both in the house and in my own heart. But the worst part wasn't her. It was Kent. When I'd moved in, he was 12. Still sweet, still the boy who'd climb into my lap for bedtime stories. But as he grew older, he started to echo his mother's tone. Cold, distant, dismissive. I'll never forget his 13th birthday. I'd spent days planning it, bought decorations with my own pension money, baked his favorite cake from scratch. But when his friends arrived, he looked at me and said, "Can you stay in your room? I don't want my friends thinking you live here." I'd swallowed my pride and stayed in my room, listening to the sound of laughter drifting up from downstairs, laughter I wasn't part of. It was the moment I realized how easily love could be forgotten, and how silently a heart could break. He'd said it so casually, "You're just Mom's mom." The words had cut deeper than he could ever understand, as if our bond existed only through Oakley, as if I were nothing more than a faded shadow at the edge of their lives. After that day, I stopped trying, stopped asking about his classes, stopped offering to help, stopped trying to connect with the boy I once adored, because every attempt only ended with rejection. But the memories that hurt the most weren't the recent ones. They were the ones from when Oakley was little. I'd been a single mother since she was 5, after her father decided that responsibility wasn't for him. I worked 2, sometimes 3 jobs, just to give her a life better than mine had ever been. I remembered one Christmas. She was 8 and wanted a pink bike with a basket and streamers. Every one of her friends had one. So for 2 months, I'd worked extra hours at the diner, saving every tip, skipping lunches just to afford it. That Christmas morning, her face had lit up like sunlight when she saw it under our tiny tree. She ran to me, hugged me so tight I could barely breathe, and whispered, "You're the best mom in the whole world." Where was that little girl now? When had gratitude turned into entitlement? When had love become a duty to be avoided? I thought about the parent-teacher meetings I'd rushed to after overnight shifts, the soccer games I'd stood through because I couldn't afford a seat, the endless yes I'd given when my heart and wallet both said no. When Oakley graduated, I'd given her my grandmother's pearl necklace, the only thing of true value I'd ever owned. It had been in our family for 3 generations. She wore it proudly, to prom, graduation, her wedding, then last year it disappeared. When I noticed it missing and asked, she shrugged. "Oh, that old thing? I sold it. They weren't even real, Mom. I had them appraised." But they were real. My grandmother had sacrificed to buy them, just like I had sacrificed to keep them in our family. That moment told me everything I needed to know about how she viewed our history, not as legacy, but as clutter. Now, sitting in the dark of what they called their house, I felt every year of my life pressing down on me. Every forgotten act of love, every dismissed effort, every piece of myself that I'd given away for nothing. But tomorrow would be different. They thought I was weak. They thought I was dependent. They thought I was done. I pulled the manila folder closer and opened it under the glow of my phone. Inside were the papers that would rewrite everything. The deed, the purchase contract, the bank statements, the transfer records. Proof that this house, the one they claimed as theirs, was built on foundations they didn't even know existed. Let them sleep peacefully tonight, dreaming about their freedom from me. Because when morning came, that illusion would shatter. The woman they'd dismissed as powerless was about to remind them who truly owned the ground beneath their feet. The morning light spilled through my window. I'd been awake since 5, the folder resting on my lap like a quiet secret. From the hallway came the sound of Oakley making breakfast, her usual rushed clatter before work. Kent's shower ran upstairs, ordinary sounds of an ordinary morning. Except today would be anything but ordinary. My hands were steady as I walked into the kitchen. The arthritis that usually made every movement ache seemed to vanish, replaced by a calm determination I hadn't felt in years. Oakley stood at the counter, scrolling through her phone while the coffee brewed. She looked up when I entered, her face tightening into that familiar look of irritation. "Good. You're up," she said flatly. "I hope you spent the night making arrangements. I meant what I said yesterday." "I know you did," I replied softly, setting the folder on the kitchen island between us. She glanced at it with a hint of curiosity. "What's that, your medical bills?" "Medical—" "Because if you think showing me numbers is going to make me feel guilty—" "It's not that," I interrupted, my voice calm but sharp. "It's something you need to see." Kent walked in, hair still damp, grabbing a slice of toast as if I weren't even there. That indifference that once crushed me now almost made me smile. "What time should I call the moving truck?" Oakley asked, still not looking at the folder. "I've got meetings all day and I want this handled before." "Open it," I said, my tone slicing clean through her words. Something in my voice made both of them stop. For the first time in years, they really looked at me. Kent froze mid-bite, eyes darting between his mother and me, sensing that something was about to change, something big. Oakley's laugh came out shaky now, no longer confident, just nervous. "Mom, what is this? Some kind of performance? Because I don't have time for—" "Open the folder, Oakley." Something in my tone stopped her mid-sentence. She stared at me for a moment, then sighed loudly and grabbed the manila folder with forced irritation. "Fine. Let's just get this over with." The first paper she pulled out was the property deed. I watched her eyes move across the page and then saw the exact second she understood what she was reading. Her face went pale, then flushed red, then pale again. This can't be right," she stammered. "What is it?" Kent asked, stepping closer to look over her shoulder. Oakley's hands began to tremble as she flipped through the rest of the papers. The bank transfers, the loan records, the insurance documents. They all told the same story. My retirement funds had paid for the down payment. The loan had been in my name. The insurance listed me as the sole owner. "I don't understand," she whispered. But from the look in her eyes, I could tell she did. "3 years ago," I began, my voice calm and steady, "when you called me crying about losing the house. You weren't just asking for help with the payments. The bank had already started foreclosure. Your credit was ruined. You were months behind because of the missed support payments." Kent's eyes darted between us, confusion giving way to shock. "The only way to save this house," I continued, "was for someone else to buy it outright, someone with good credit and enough savings to cover the debt. So I bought it. The house, the land, everything." Oakley sank into the nearest chair, clutching the documents like they might vanish. "But you told me you were helping with the mortgage." "I was," I said evenly. "I've been paying the mortgage, on my own house, for 3 years, while you treated me like a burden you were graciously supporting." The kitchen fell silent. Even the coffee maker seemed to stop mid-drip. Kent stood frozen, his piece of toast hanging loosely from his hand, peanut butter slowly dripping onto the floor. "Why?" Oakley finally whispered. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I didn't want to hurt your pride," I said quietly. "I thought if you knew the truth, you'd feel guilty or ashamed. I wanted you to feel secure here, not like you were living in my home." I pulled out a chair and sat across from her, feeling both older and stronger than I had in years. "I put the deed in my name to protect us all. If something happened to you, Kent would still have a home. And if something happened to me, it would go to you in my will. I thought I was being generous. I thought I was being a good mother." Oakley's eyes filled with tears, not the practiced kind I'd seen too often, but the real ones. The kind that come when your entire world shifts beneath your feet. "Mom, Let me finish," I said firmly, holding up my hand. "For 3 years you've treated me like a charity case. You've made me feel small, unwanted, and ashamed of simply existing under your roof. You let your son speak to me in ways you would never have dared when you were his age." Kent flinched. His face turned red, realizing I'd noticed every cruel word, every eye roll, every sigh. "And yesterday," I continued, "you told me I had 1 day to leave your house. You called me a burden, a nuisance, someone taking advantage of your kindness." I reached across the table and gently took the deed from her shaking hands. "But here's the truth, sweetheart. This isn't your house. It's mine. It has been for 3 years. And if anyone needs to start packing, it's not me." The color drained completely from Oakley's face. "You can't be serious," she whispered. "Yesterday," I said, "Kent told me I wasn't really his grandmother. You said I was taking up space, not contributing anything. Well, now you know exactly what I've been contributing." Kent's toast slipped from his hand and hit the floor with a dull thud. "Grandma," he started, his voice trembling. Hearing him use that word again, after so long, made my chest ache. "I didn't mean it," he said quickly. "Yes, you did," I replied gently but firmly. "You both did, and that's all right because now we finally understand each other." Oakley's breathing grew fast and shallow. "Mom, please. I was angry yesterday. I was stressed about work, about money. I didn't mean what I said." "Yes, you did," I repeated. "You've meant it for a long time. This isn't just about one bad day. It's been building for 3 years." I stood, feeling lighter than I had in ages. "Now," I said, with quiet satisfaction, "I believe someone mentioned something about having 24 hours to pack." Oakley's eyes widened in disbelief. "You're kicking us out? Mom, we have nowhere to go." "I'm sure you'll figure something out," I said, matching the same dismissive tone she'd used on me countless times. "You're both young and capable. Maybe one of those apartments downtown would suit you better." Mom, wait!" She started to rise, but her hand slipped from the table. Her face went pale again, then gray. The sound of her body hitting the chair echoed through the kitchen as she slumped forward, unconscious. Kent's scream cut through the air. Oakley came to 5 minutes later, sprawled on the kitchen floor with Kent kneeling beside her, his face pale with panic. I sat calmly at the table, a damp washcloth in my hand, waiting. "Mom," Kent was saying, patting her cheek frantically. "Mom, please, wake up." When her eyes finally fluttered open, the first thing she saw was me, sitting there, completely composed. For a moment, confusion flickered across her face. Then the realization hit, and she whispered, "Oh, this is really happening." I handed her the washcloth. "Drink some water." She took it with trembling hands, her gaze locked on mine, searching, maybe, for a hint that this was all some elaborate joke, that the mother she'd always pushed around would suddenly back down. She wouldn't find it. "Grandma," Kent said softly, his voice cracking, "please, we're sorry. We didn't know." "Didn't know what?" I asked gently. "That I'm a human being with feelings? That treating people badly has consequences? That actions matter?" He flinched as if I'd struck him. I was being stupid," he stammered. "I didn't mean what I said, about you not being my real grandma, or being a burden, or—" "Which part didn't you mean, Kent?" I asked, keeping my tone calm, but letting every word land. Tears spilled down his cheeks. Real tears this time, not the practiced kind he'd learned from watching his mother. "All of it," he whispered. "None of it. I didn't mean any of it." "Because your mother taught you it was okay to treat me that way," I finished for him. "Because you watched her dismiss me and make me small for 3 years and you thought that was acceptable." Oakley had pulled herself into a chair, though she looked like she might collapse again. "Mom, I know I haven't been. I know I've made mistakes," she said shakily. "But you can't just throw us out. We're family." "Family?" I repeated slowly. "Is that what we are? Because yesterday you made it very clear that I wasn't family. You said I was a burden, someone taking advantage of your generosity." "I was angry," she said, her voice cracking. "People say things they don't mean when they're angry. You know that." "Do they?" I asked quietly. "When I was angry that you sold my grandmother's pearls without asking, I didn't call you names. When I was hurt that you stopped including me in family photos, I didn't threaten to throw you out. When I was lonely because you both treated me like I was invisible, I didn't make you feel unwelcome in your own home." Each example landed like a hammer. I saw it in their faces, the recognition, the shame, the memory of every careless word. "I did make you feel unwelcome," Oakley whispered finally. "Yes," I said simply. "You did." Kent's voice broke again. "We can change. I can be better. I promise." "Can you?" I asked softly. "Because this isn't the first time we've had this talk. Every time I've tried to tell you how you treat me, you've called me dramatic or oversensitive. Every time I've asked for basic respect, you've acted like I was asking for too much. I reached for the folder again and pulled out another stack of papers. Do you want to know what else I've been paying for? Oakley's face drained of color. What do you mean? Let's start with Kent's school, I said, spreading the documents across the table. That private school you love telling everyone you're sacrificing to afford? I've been paying the tuition. Every month, $1,200 from my Social Security check. Kent's eyes widened. But Mom said, Your mother has told you many things that weren't exactly true, I said evenly. The car insurance on your Honda? Mine. The health insurance that covers your checkups and sports injuries? Mine. The internet bill you use to play your games? Also mine. I laid each document down one by one: tuition, utilities, taxes, groceries, maintenance, every proof of contribution stacked like evidence in a courtroom. The grocery bills, the property taxes, the insurance. Should I keep going? Oakley was making small, shallow breaths, like she couldn't get enough air. I thought I was helping, she whispered. My salary— Your salary barely covers your car payment and credit cards, I said quietly. I've been supporting this entire household while you convinced yourself you were supporting me. The truth settled over the room like a heavy storm. Kent looked between us, his mother pale, his grandmother steady, struggling to process everything that had just overturned his world. So, I continued, my voice calm but sharp, when you said I was taking up space, what you really meant was that I was taking up space in the house I own, eating food I buy, using utilities I pay for, all while doing the cleaning, the cooking, and the care that keeps this house running. Mom, Oakley whispered. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know it was that much. You didn't want to know, I corrected softly. There's a difference. You liked believing you were the generous daughter helping your poor mother. It made you feel noble, powerful, in control. I stood and walked to the window, looking out over the garden I'd tended for years, the flowers I'd planted, the fence I'd paid to fix, the deck I'd had restored. But the truth is, I said, turning back to face them, you've been living off me while treating me like a burden. You've been raising your son to disrespect the very woman keeping a roof over his head. You've been playing house with my money while making me feel grateful for the privilege. When I turned around, they were both staring at me, not with anger or defiance this time, but with something new. Fear. 24 hours, I said quietly. That's what you gave me. So that's exactly what I'm giving you. But where will we go? Kent asked, his voice small now, stripped of all its teenage bravado. I don't know, I admitted, but I'm sure you'll figure something out. You're both young and capable. You have each other, and you have choices I never had when I was starting over. Oakley gripped the edge of the table, her knuckles white. You're really going to do this? You're really going to make us homeless? I'm not making you anything, I said softly. I'm simply taking back ownership of my own life. You wanted me gone? Fine. Now you can be gone instead. But we're sorry, Kent burst out. We said we were sorry. Sorry you got caught, I said gently. Sorry that your actions finally have consequences. But are you sorry for how you treated me? Or just sorry that treating me badly turned out to be a mistake? The question hung in the air, heavy, undeniable, because we all knew the answer. I picked up my folder and turned toward my room. You have until tomorrow morning, I said over my shoulder. I'd suggest you start making calls. Behind me, Oakley's sobs filled the kitchen, and Kent's voice trembled as he tried to comfort her. Once those sounds would have shattered me. I would have rushed to fix everything, but not this time. Now, they were just noise. For the first time in 3 years, I was in control of my own story, and it felt incredible. The house changed the moment their car pulled away. Not empty, liberated, like a breath I'd been holding for 3 long years had finally been released. They'd left that morning with whatever they could cram into Oakley's Honda and a small rented trailer, paid for, ironically, with money borrowed from the ex-husband who'd ignored them for years. Funny how people reappear when they think there's something to gain. At the door, Oakley had made one last attempt to pull my heartstrings. Kent stood beside her, clinging to her arm like he was 12 again instead of 15. "Mom, please," she whispered, eyes red and puffy. "Just give us another chance. We can make this work." But her idea of making it work was pretending the past 3 years had never happened, pretending I was still grateful for scraps of affection while paying for the privilege of being mistreated. "You'll always have a chance to earn your way back into my life," I told her, "but it'll be on my terms, not yours." The look she gave me then was pure disbelief, like someone realizing their pet goldfish had suddenly grown teeth. Now I stood in my kitchen. My kitchen. For the first time, I saw the space clearly. The cabinet doors Oakley had always kept closed because open shelves looked cheap. The fancy coffee machine I wasn't allowed to touch. The breakfast nook where I'd been told to eat while they sat at the main dining table. I opened every cabinet door. I made myself a latte with the expensive machine. And I sat at the head of the dining table, my table, spreading my papers across its polished surface. The silence was magnificent. My phone rang all day. First Oakley, then Kent, then her sister Beth, apparently elected as the family negotiator. "Aunt Pet, this is crazy," Beth said when I finally picked up. "Oakley told me everything. There must be some misunderstanding." "No misunderstanding," I replied calmly. "Just a long overdue correction?" "But they're family," Beth insisted. "You can't just throw family out." I laughed, a sound that surprised even me. "Beth," I asked, "when was the last time Oakley invited you to a family dinner that included me? When was the last time Kent mentioned me at all? They made it very clear I wasn't family. I'm just honoring their decision." Every other conversation followed the same script: shock, guilt-tripping, and then awkward silence when they realized I wasn't backing down. It struck me how not one of them had called in 3 years to ask how I was doing. Not one had noticed that I'd slowly vanished from holidays and family photos. But now that there were consequences, suddenly everyone cared about family unity. By evening, I unplugged the phone. The peace was priceless. Over the next few days, I rediscovered my house, my life. I moved my things out of the cramped back room and into the master suite Oakley had claimed for herself. I rearranged the furniture, opened every curtain, and played my favorite music as loud as I wanted. In her closet, I found boxes labeled temporary storage, boxes filled with my own belongings, old photographs, books I'd thought were lost, the china set from my grandmother, all tucked away because they didn't fit Oakley's aesthetic. And then, hidden behind coats I'd never seen her wear, I found my grandmother's recipe box. Inside were handwritten cards, Sunday dinners, holiday dishes, notes in faded ink from a different time, recipes Oakley had once called too much work. That weekend, I made my grandmother's pot roast, the house filled with the smell of herbs, broth, and slow-cooked memories. For the first time in years, it smelled like home. I set the dining table with my best china and cloth napkins. I lit candles. I even opened a bottle of wine I'd been saving for a special occasion. Then I called my neighbor, Mrs. Chen, a woman who'd always been kind but distant, mostly because Oakley had made it clear that Mom's friends weren't welcome in her house. "Pet," she'd said, clearly surprised to hear from me, "is everything all right?" "Everything is perfect," I told her. "Would you like to come for dinner? I'm making pot roast." That night was the first time I'd hosted anyone in my own home since moving in. Mrs. Chen came with her sister, who brought her friend Margaret, and before long, the house was filled with laughter and warmth in a way it had never been when Oakley and Kent lived here. "This house has such good energy," Margaret said, smiling as she looked around the living room. If only she knew how unwelcoming it had felt just a week earlier. The phone calls from Oakley began the next day. At first they were polite, then pleading, then desperate. She'd moved in with David temporarily, but his new girlfriend wasn't thrilled about sharing the space. Kent was sleeping on a couch, complaining about missing his friends and his school. "Mom, this is ridiculous," Oakley said during one late-night call. "You've made your point. We get it. We were wrong. Can't we just move past this?" "Move past it." "To what?" I asked. "Back to you treating me like a servant?" Back to Kent acting ashamed of me? Back to me paying for everything while being treated like a burden? "We'll be better," she promised. "Things will be different." "How?" I asked. There was a long silence on the other end before she hung up. That's when I knew. She still didn't understand. She thought this was about punishment, about teaching a lesson that would end once she said she was sorry. But this wasn't about punishment. This was about me finally understanding my own worth. I started making real changes. I switched Kent's school payments to a monthly transfer that would stop if his grades slipped or if I heard about any disrespect. I adjusted the health insurance payments so they could be canceled with 30 days' notice. I opened new credit cards in my name only and closed every joint account where Oakley had been an authorized user. Most importantly, I changed my will. For years, I'd planned to leave everything to Oakley and Kent. The house, the savings, my insurance. They were my only family. But I'd finally learned that family isn't defined by blood. It's defined by respect, kindness, and mutual care. I met with my lawyer and created a new will. Kent would still have a trust for his education, but only if he maintained good grades and good behavior. The rest, the house, the assets, would go to charities that support elderly people mistreated by their families. As for Oakley, she would inherit exactly what she once told me I was worth. Nothing. 3 weeks after they'd left, I was outside watering my garden when a car pulled up. Kent stepped out of the passenger seat, looking older somehow, heavier, as if carrying the weight of everything that had happened. He approached slowly, hands shoved in his pockets. "Hi, Grandma," he said quietly. "Hello, Kent." I kept watering the flowers, not making it easy for him. "I wanted to apologize," he said. "For real this time. Not because I want anything, but because what I said was wrong." I looked at him then, really looked. His clothes were wrinkled, his hair messy, dark circles under his eyes. "Are you apologizing because you understand why it was wrong?" I asked. "Or because you don't like the consequences?" He thought for a moment before answering. "Both, I guess. But mostly because I hurt you, and you didn't deserve it." It was the first genuinely grown-up thing I'd heard from him in years. "I miss you," he added softly. "I miss living here. But mostly I just miss you. I miss talking to you, having you help me with stuff, eating your cooking." "What kind of stuff?" I asked, curious if he remembered. "Everything," he said, his voice breaking. "Math, homework, friend problems. And that time I was scared about starting high school. You always listened. You never made me feel stupid." "And how did you repay that?" I asked gently. He winced. "By being a selfish brat who cared more about what my friends thought than about hurting someone who loved me." The honesty in his voice caught me off guard. This wasn't manipulation. This was genuine remorse. "Your mother doesn't know you're here, does she?" I asked. He shook his head. "She thinks I'm at basketball practice. But I wanted to come by myself, because this is between you and me. What I said, that's on me." Smart boy, I thought. Smarter than his mother, certainly. "What do you want from me, Kent?" He swallowed hard. "I want to know if there's any way I can earn your forgiveness and maybe someday earn the right to be your grandson again." The phrase "earn the right" told me everything I needed to know. "That depends," I said. "Are you willing to do the work, even if your mother isn't?" He nodded slowly, eyes shining. "Yes, Grandma, I am." 6 months later, I sat on my back deck, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and rose. The garden was thriving, the roses I'd planted were finally blooming, and the house behind me felt alive in a way it never had before. Peaceful, content, mine. Kent had kept his word. Every week he found a reason to visit, sometimes saying he had basketball practice, sometimes pretending to study at the library. We started small, pulling weeds, trimming hedges, talking about school and life. Without his mother's constant negativity, I began to see the boy I remembered, thoughtful, kind, curious. He'd even brought his report card last week, straight A's for the first time in 2 years. "I figured," he'd said with a shy grin, If you're paying for my education, I should probably take it seriously. And for the first time in years, I heard something genuine in his voice. Pride. We'd set clear rules for our relationship. He would treat me with respect. He wouldn't hide me from his friends or act ashamed of who I was, and most importantly, he would never again use my love as leverage. In return, I continued to support his education and welcomed him into my life. We cooked together on Sundays. I taught him my grandmother's recipes. He even brought a friend over once, proudly introducing me as my awesome grandma who makes the best chocolate chip cookies in the state. The pride that moment gave me. It was worth every painful day of the last 3 years. Oakley, however, remained Oakley. She tried everything: guilt, charm, apologies, even money. She brought flowers, handwritten letters, promises to do better. Once she even offered to pay rent for her old room, but she still didn't get it. I said, "I'm sorry," she'd argued during our last call. "How many times do I have to apologize before you forgive me?" "It's not about how many times you say it," I told her gently. "It's about whether you understand why you're saying it." "I treated you badly. I was ungrateful. I hurt your feelings," she rattled off. "What else do you want me to say?" "I want you to understand why you treated me that way," I said softly. "I want you to recognize the pattern and do the work to change it, not just promise to." She'd hung up without another word. The truth was, I wasn't sure she was ready for that kind of honesty. She'd spent too many years believing she was always the victim, the one who was owed, never the one who owed. But I'd learned something vital. You can't fix people who don't want to see themselves clearly. You can only choose peace for yourself. One evening, as I sat on the deck, lost in thought, my phone rang. Kent's name lit up the screen. "Hi, Grandma," he said, his voice bubbling with excitement. "Guess what? I got accepted to that summer program at the university, the one for students interested in engineering." "That's wonderful," I said, smiling. "When does it start?" "Next month. And, Grandma? I put you down as my emergency contact. I hope that's okay." The words hit deeper than he probably realized. For the first time in years, I wasn't a hidden afterthought. I was his person again, someone he trusted. "Of course it's okay," I said. "I'm proud of you, Kent." "I couldn't have done it without you," he said quietly. "Not just the money, but you believing in me again. It made me want to be someone worth believing in." After we hung up, I sat in the twilight, the last light fading into deep blue. What I felt wasn't revenge. It was peace. The warm, quiet kind that comes from finally respecting yourself. I thought about the woman I'd been half a year ago. Small, uncertain, thankful for scraps of kindness from people who treated her like an inconvenience. That woman was gone. I'd learned that love without respect isn't love, that being a good mother doesn't mean losing yourself to please others, and that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is stop enabling the people who hurt you. The doorbell rang. It was late for visitors. When I opened the door, I froze. Oakley stood on the porch, but this time she looked different, smaller somehow, her usual confidence stripped away. Her hair was pulled back, no makeup, just tired eyes that had finally seen too much. "Mom," she said quietly, "can we talk?" I studied her face, searching for signs of manipulation or guilt. But for the first time in years, I saw something else. Humility. "All right," I said, stepping aside to let her in. We sat together in the living room, my living room, surrounded by my photos, my furniture, my peace. She looked around, taking it all in. "It looks good," she said softly. "It looks like you." "Thank you," I said. We sat in silence for a long moment before she spoke again. "I've been seeing a therapist," she said. "Dr. Martinez. She specializes in family relationships." I raised an eyebrow. "Well," I said, a small smile tugging at my lips, "it sounds like you're finally starting to do the work." Oakley had always dismissed therapy as paying someone to tell you what you already know. So when she said she'd started seeing a therapist, I couldn't help but raise an eyebrow. "What made you decide to do that?" I asked. She looked down at her hands, twisting a loose thread on her jeans. "Kent," she said softly, "he asked me why I'm so angry all the time, why I say cruel things to people I love, and I realized I didn't have a good answer." Her voice was quiet, raw in a way I hadn't heard in years. "Dr. Martinez helped me see things about myself, why I need control, why I get angry when people don't need me, and," she hesitated, "why I've spent so much of my life trying to make others dependent on me." I tilted my head. "And what did you discover?" "That I was terrified," she whispered. "Terrified that if people didn't need me, they'd leave. Like Dad did. So I created situations where people had to rely on me, and then I resented them for it." It was the most honest thing she'd ever said to me. "And with you," she continued, "I couldn't stand that you were taking care of me instead of the other way around. It made me feel like a failure, like a little girl who couldn't handle her own life, so I convinced myself that you were the one who needed me." "Even though you knew I was paying for everything?" I asked quietly. Tears filled her eyes. She nodded. "I knew, deep down I knew, but I told myself stories, that you needed structure, that living with us was good for you. I made myself believe I was doing you a favor." "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked. "Because Kent deserves better," she said, "and because you deserved better, and because I want to be the kind of person who can admit when she's wrong, and actually do something about it." I studied her face, really studied it. This wasn't the same woman who'd screamed at me to get out 6 months ago. This was someone who'd done the work. "What do you want from me, Oakley?" I asked. "Nothing," she said, and that word surprised me. "I don't want anything from you. I just needed you to know that I understand now. I understand what I did, and why I did it, and I'm sorry, truly sorry. If you never forgive me, if this conversation changes nothing between us," she took a shaky breath, "then at least you'll know that I see you, the real you, the woman who sacrificed everything for her daughter and was treated like she didn't matter, the grandmother who loved her grandson unconditionally, only to be made to feel like that love was worthless." She stood up, wiping her eyes. "Kent told me he's been visiting you. I'm glad. He needs you, and you deserve to have someone appreciate you the way he's learning to." She started for the door, then turned back. "I know I don't have the right to ask for anything, but would you consider letting me earn my way back into your life? Not as someone who needs you, not as someone you have to take care of, just as your daughter, who finally understands what that means." I looked at her. This woman who had caused so much pain, but who was finally facing herself honestly. And for the first time, I saw both versions of her. The broken adult and the little girl who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms, whispering, "You're the best mom in the world." "It would be a long process," I said finally, "and it would have to be on my terms." "I understand. You'd have to prove that this isn't just temporary remorse, that you've truly changed, not just learned what to say." "I understand that too," she said quietly. "And you'll have to accept that our relationship will never go back to what it was. I'm not the same person who tolerated disrespect to keep the peace." "I wouldn't want it to go back," she said. "That version of us was toxic. This time I want something real." I walked her to the door, feeling lighter than I had in months. Not because I'd decided to forgive her, but because for the first time I had a choice. I had real power in defining the terms of my own relationships. "Call me next week," I said. "We'll see how it goes." She nodded, whispered, "Thank you," and walked away into the night. Later, I sat back on the deck, watching the stars appear one by one in the darkening sky. For the first time in years, I felt hopeful. I'd learned that respect isn't something you can demand, it's something you must require, that love without respect is just manipulation dressed up as kindness, and that sometimes the most courageous thing you can do is value yourself enough to walk away from those who don't. Whether Oakley truly changed or not, that was her journey. But either way, I would be fine. I had a home I loved, friends who valued me, a grandson who was learning to be a good man, and most importantly, I had myself back. At 69 years old, I'd finally learned that the only approval I ever truly needed was my own. And for the first time in decades, I had it.